what I want you to do. Yeah, well, somebody sticks a camera in your face, everybody gets nervous.
Yeah.
Kids were great.
Yeah.
They did real well.
These guys are awesome. They really are.
Okay, we're rolling. Okay, let's go.
Okay, thank you for Queen. That was an awesome lesson that you did. So we're just gonna go around and kind of give an overview of the lesson, what kind of stood out, but we'll start with you and tell us how you think the lesson went with what you prepared.
Okay, so overall, I think it was okay. When I first started, I wanted to do, like I was doing the learning goal and I wasn't expecting that they were not going to be able to explain numerator and denominator. And so then I was like, ugh, what do I do? And so I knew that I was going to go over and try to model it. And so I thought, okay, well, instead of trying to explain it first and then reviewing vocabulary, let me just put it all into one, really make sure we go over the vocabulary so that they're understanding it for the lesson while I'm doing the learning goal at the same time. So in that part, I think I was a little worried because I think I was taking too much time right there. But then I thought if they don't understand numerator and denominator, they're not going to be able to verbalize what I want them to verbalize today. So, so that part I kind of changed quickly. And then that part was like, I think the one part missing was okay, but I'm not sure. I think I could have done something a little bit better to give them the sentence frames, or I don't know, make it more visible, print them out for them, or something that they could use the sentence starters for how they were going to start talking about it.
Is that the first time that you've put those on the board, or have you done that before in recent weeks? Like for example, with other lessons, or over the past couple months.
Science, don't you?
I do them. I do it usually, and I usually just am writing it on the board and then leaving it. But I think the part I need to plan out a little bit better is sometimes I use the document camera. I mean the Elmo, and then I erase because I need that space. So then I don't think through sometimes like, oh, I need that space, so I've got to erase it. Whereas sometimes I think that's where the chart paper would come in better, because then I can just move it and then keep it up during the, like for weeks, right? While we're doing this, then those frames are still up.
Come back to it just repetitively every day.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Here's the sentence starters.
So I use them, but they change, and then it's not consistent. Like I don't have a poster for it or anything, so they can't just come back to it.
Maybe an anchor chart, like how you have those anchor charts up there with just sentence starters. Like you have math sentence starters, science sentence starters, and reading. Maybe that's a direction to go.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then the game, I think it went okay, and I think they were understanding that part. And then I think the sheets came in handy, because then they were able to keep track of it, and it was easier to explain. Like I think I would have had a harder time trying to explain to them. Then that's what I'm always saying is like I need the modeling, like they need to see. So I was able to model it, and maybe I should have done one or two more just to make sure. But it seemed like they were all using it pretty well when we went through. And I think the best part of the lesson was being able to hear where they didn't understand, because they really didn't understand a lot. Like there were parts where they were really mixing it up. So some of them were saying like one part was bigger than another part, or they just had it backwards even in their explanation, so they're not understanding. So I think that was good for me, just to kind of figure out where to go from here, that we still need to go over this more, even though it looks like they understand, and some of them I think are still really having a hard time. One part I think was really cool, watching Nevin and Adam work, because they really use those sentence frames. So they were like, I disagree because, and then the fraction, and then they named the fractions. And then Nevin was having a hard time, like he disagreed, but he was having a hard time explaining. So they were going over that 2 2s instead of 2 halves. So I had to keep going over and saying, okay, these are halves. And so when we say it, we're going to say 2 halves. Or so he was saying 2 halves is equal to a whole. And then Adam was doing the same thing, but with thirds. So he was saying 4 3s. And so then we were saying thirds, what are they? So he was like, oh, that's 3 thirds. Okay, so 3 thirds is equal to 1. And at one point he said 3 halves. So because Nevin was using halves, so he used halves even though his was thirds. But I think that part, it was a really good way of seeing really how much they understood. And then when they were putting it into sentences. And then even the end, coming back to that same question with which one is bigger. Like, it was really interesting because I thought they were understanding. Like the ones I went around to see, I was checking on them and it looked like they understood. And then when they were writing out their answers, or even just talking about their answers for the first problem, I think then they kind of, they didn't have it anymore. It was really interesting. Like a lot of them said 3/4 was bigger than 5/6. So when you look at their work, and so I think that's really interesting too. So it was good, but I think I need to go spend some more time with their understanding.
Just building on that, one of the things that I noticed, to me, and you hit on it during the summer, you were asking in relation to 1, compare it to 1. But I noticed that going back and really sort of direct teaching this idea of use 0, 1 half, and 1 make it explicit that those are the benchmark numbers.
Yeah.
And use those as your tool in your thinking process, I think would really be helpful, because the students who did that were able to, I was able to, okay, that makes sense. Others struggled. And just having something to compare to as a thinking tool, I think would be powerful. So, but the other point I wanted to mention is that I just noticed the culture of discourse was powerful. I mean, they went to most of them that I observed went directly to the board and used the sentence starters relatively naturally. It just speaks for the culture of student discourse that you've cultivated in the class over this past year. So that's kudos for that. So I have other things, but
Okay, so what I saw from the lesson, things that stood out to me. Well, first of all, the part where you had to bring in their understanding of numerators and denominators. Like at a certain point, I thought they got it, but you kept going with it. Like they had that understanding. And then I thought the part where you put up 2 6 and 1/4, like just putting in any other teacher I think I've seen would have been like, no, this is not it. Like teachers give kids the answers. You made them figure it out themselves. You made them reason it out, because other kids were like, no, 2 8 is equal to 1/4. Well, 2 6 is equal to 1/3. So having them kind of struggle, they were able to figure it out. So I thought that was pretty powerful. The think, pair, share, even just allowing them, okay, I want you to think about it, because we know some kids are fast thinkers and some take time. You need time to think about it before I can turn to my partner, because the ones that take longer to process need that extra time, and you were giving them that time. And when they did turn to their partner, they had something to say, as opposed to, okay, think or turn to your partner and talk about whatever. That's kind of giving those slow processing kids, that you're hindering them by just making them discuss right away. So I thought that was pretty powerful. Another thing was, after they started their activity and we were going around, you were able to identify kids, or I was, of kids that had no understanding. Like over here we had Amari, who just like, she was stumped. She didn't even know which one was the bigger fraction, and she couldn't see that she had 3 holes and Tavia had 2 holes and Jennifer only had 1 hole, but she couldn't see that. So you can tell that her level of understanding compared to the other 2, it just came out. But then as I stayed with them and when you walked off, so she was able to kind of understand it more as we went along, but the other 2 girls kind of still had to guide her. So this activity, I think really you could point out the kids that didn't understand. I didn't get to go to all the groups, but the ones that I did. Oh, another thing that I noticed, I know they made their own cards, and there was Caitlin who had a fraction. She had a box of 4 pieces and she had 2 shaded in, but her fraction was 4 halves. So
yeah, and I noticed several of those, and so definitely, and that led to the misconceptions, right?
Yeah.
It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
So.
And even her partner didn't see it. They just kept going. They just both assumed it was the right fraction, or they saw the model of it, so that's where their understanding was, and they really didn't see that correlation between the model and the fraction, the numbers. So I was like, wait, hold on, is this 4 halves? And it took them a while. It took Caitlin a while. No, then she erased it, then she put 2 over 4. So just being aware of when the kids produce their own materials, that we need to kind of maybe check.
Did they produce them yesterday?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I left early.
Yeah. So I did notice it on several of them as well, and then there was also this idea of different units, and so that's the other thing to just double check. There was, the fractions were correct, but they were using different units. Okay, so we need to make sure that if we're going to use, the units have to be the same size, because a couple of them took and cut the units. In other words, those units in half.
So
and one of them,
like
you took notes, right?
This was 3/12 on one card, and they were comparing it to 1/2,
which is a completely
on
different
another
unit.
card, and they held them up to each other, but this was the units for one, and look how close 1/2 came to 3/12. So that was interesting, that a huge understanding.
And that was partly from yesterday, like, so when they were trying to make, like, let's say they were trying to make tenths yesterday, and we gave them, the cards come thirds, fifths, and then they're blank holes. So for like the halves and fourths, they draw them in. But for the thirds, they're already pre-made, so they don't have to draw anything. And then like the fifths, they're already pre-made.
Right.
So to make tenths, some of them were like, okay, what do we do? And so some of them figured out, like, you could just, if you cut horizontally the fifths, you'd get tenths. But some of them thought, well, let me just get another fifth, stick them together.
Right.
And so if I didn't catch all of those yesterday,
I
they didn't.
Yeah, so that's key, and that perpetuated misconceptions. But I think that's a great teaching moment too, is to just take a couple of them and to ask the class, what do you think, classes? Are these comparing apples to apples, basically?
Yeah.
Are they the same size unit? And then really having that discussion.
And did they have the opportunity to choose whether they wanted to write it as an improper fraction or a mixed number?
They just had a list, and so they just copied their whatever their column
some were
was.
written in mixed numbers and some were written as improper fractions. So I just kind of wondered about that.
That's just one of the parts where I think sometimes, like with investigations, I think, like, you go from one lesson, so one lesson, you know, like, they understand, right? So we looked at that last one and they were benchmark, and you guys went, wow, they really understand. Then you go to the next lesson and it's like, all of a sudden, you got mixed numbers, you know, improper fractions, and it's kind of like all at once. And so then you really like, I think sometimes I confuse them because it's all at once. So sometimes I think if I pull back a little bit and say, okay, I'm not going to include these ones, let's just start with this, make sure they understand this, then we'll add the mixed numbers in.
I mean, you obviously stated a lot of the things that I observed as well. Same thing with Ms. Toya. I basically did what Zach has done in the past. I was keeping track of, you know, how much time was used. The learning goal took about 12 minutes. I noticed that, you know, you said you clumped them together, and I saw that you use whole number, numerator, and denominator during your learning goal, that they were introduced, but the word equivalent wasn't introduced till about 40 minutes into the lesson. That's from what I saw. But, you know, even though a lot of time was spent on that activating their prior knowledge, I saw that this was essential because I saw that they were having misconceptions of numerator and denominator. So I think that was good that it was all lumped together. And then when you were introducing you drew the two fractions and you posed that problem, you phrased it that they were the same. You know, like, just imagine that these two boxes are the same. And then when you jumped into your question, you said, this student believes that they're the same. And I know that I was looking around, I was like, that's kind of confusing to me too, because I mean, you're phrasing it, you're using the same word in sharing that the box is the same, but then the problem, you said that the student believes that the fractions are the same, you know, so I don't know if that kind of threw them off a little bit there. Instead of, because I was thinking that you would use the word equivalent, you know, at that point, that they believe that they're the same or equivalent, you know, at that point. And then
I just wanted to add to that. I was a little confused there too. As a student, I'm glad you brought that out, because there's two things going on. There's the same outside, you know, the whole unit, and then there's the subsections, right? I mean, the fraction of that unit. And I'm wondering if some color would have been perhaps like out. So I actually outlined mine in pink, and then saying, okay, we have the whole unit is the same. I'm going to divide this whole unit, which is exactly the same, into 6 pieces versus 4 pieces. How much is shaded, or something like that? So I was a little confused.
We know that you can't draw 2 exact same size boxes. Maybe in the future we could use a paper, 2 pieces of paper, and then put the fractions of a different color, like a pink paper, and then make the fractions a different color. So they see that the 2 boxes are exactly the same instead of drawing them on the board. So that would have helped eliminate all this confusion. So, because when you phrased that question, you know, and then I kind of noticed that only 2 had their hand raised, and obviously they understood. But as they got into communicating with one another, I felt that then they were able to have a conversation on what the question actually meant, and I think that really helped a lot of the students out at that point. And looking at when you had asked Marlo to share his understanding of what he felt was the correct answer, whether he felt that he agreed or disagreed, I felt like his understanding was there, but I felt the sentence strip or whatever misguided him, because he was just rephrasing or repeating what it says right there. You know, because he said that I disagree because the fraction 3/4, so he put in 3/4 is bigger than 5/6 because, and then he explained. So I felt like he used that exactly word for rather than flipping them. You know what I mean? Because I felt like he used it word for word, but he didn't put the fractions in the right place.
But that's what he really thinks. If you look at his work the whole time, he does really think 3/4 is bigger than 5/6. Okay. Like he has major, he's still not understanding a lot. Because if you look at his notebook, it'll still, because I was watching them at the very end, so I was asking that group, okay, what do you guys think? And so Javon started drawing that picture. He drew his fraction bars, one on top of the other. And he had his 4th, and then he drew his 6th. And so he was looking at it, and he could see, he didn't shade in the whole thing. He just went over to the 5th, 6th, shaded it in, and then he was like, okay, like that one's bigger. Yeah. But then as they were talking and they were still going around, then later he changed it and he erased like the other part, and he drew his fourth almost to line up with that sixth. And so then he was saying they were the same. But that whole time Marlo kept saying that 3/4 is bigger than, he disagreed with him when he said that. He goes, I think 3/4 is bigger than 5/6. So
If you had the fraction blank is less than, I felt like he would have an option. You
Yeah.
know, to where he would have said 3/4 is less than. But that's what I was thinking at the time when I was just observing. Because I felt like, I think he understands, but I felt like the sentence was guiding him the wrong way. But, you know, obviously, in looking more at his work, that he does have a bigger misunderstanding of the fractions.
And I plan to do that, like on the paper, right? I have that I was going to do that. But then I thought if I put the slash and smaller than, then I'm going to confuse
Yeah.
them. Because
You
then
would
they'll
need
be
a-
saying bigger and
Yeah.
smaller. And then I
a
didn't
completely
take,
different
yeah, and I didn't take the time to write the
Yeah.
second sentence out.
And then I think, you know, toward the end, you know, when you pose that question again, the same made sense because he didn't refer to the same shape again that, you know, everybody or most students had a better understanding. I know I did at the end on what you were referring to. But, you know, you could see the misconception there, and I like how they were explaining because I know I was over here with these three young ladies here, and they were talking about the smaller the denominator, the bigger the pieces. So I think, you know, that understanding of that is good there, but when it came to which fraction is closer to one whole, they were referring back to that, you know, that's a bigger piece, so it makes it closer to the one whole. But then you had some students that were saying that basically went and back and said, yeah, they're both close to one whole because they're both missing one piece. So I think, you know, just and what I did with some of the students, because I had with those three girls, they had three fractions, and it was obvious, you know, which one was bigger. Then I put the two, like the 3/4 and the 2/3. You know, I asked which one's bigger, and you know, they picked the right one, and Jennifer actually lined it up. The reason why is because this fraction is, and then, you know, going back to how they created their own fractions, the consistency wasn't there because they're units, because it kind of lined up, and it was hard for her to validate her argument. When she put them together, they're almost exactly the same. So what we did is, like, look, if you look at a pizza, you know, you cut it into 4ths and 3rds, which one's bigger, you know, and then I kind of just used a circle for them, and it was easy for them to see at that point was the pizza. And I think with the 3/4 and the 5/6, it'd be easy to make two pizzas to show them in a different model that, you know, obviously that one's closer to a one whole pizza than this one is.
That's a good point. Just going to circles, you know, and then seeing if that interpretation was you know, more revealing as far as understanding.
Yeah. I always just thought circles were a little more confusing. Like, it's harder to
The
get.
accuracy, right?
Yeah. So I think I don't use them as much just because I think that they're gonna have because they're not accurate with their drawings and stuff. I just don't use them as.
Well, for this one, I
As
think
much.
you could replicate, because you could divide both of them in half, you know, and then it's just a fourth like that. And then for that one, you divide it in half, and then you just cut it like this, and you have your 6 slices and 4 slices. For this one, I think it will work.
I think another thing that I could give you is those fraction pieces from the Do the Math, the ones that go on the board, the teacher set. Have you ever seen those? They have all the fractions, all the way down to 1/16.
Are they big enough so you can?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
they're pretty. They're
Oh,
probably
nice.
the size of your that
Yeah.
fraction equivalent sizes. Having them just manipulate them and put those fractions up. If they're like really stumped on a particular one, not all the kids go up, but if you see struggling ones that can't really see it, and then you bring those fractions
And
you
or
can-
interventions too. you
Yeah.
know.
So I can give you a set that you can keep up on your board.
You know, I want to just, this lesson was so powerful to me because this lesson revealed student thinking like I haven't seen you know, in a way that I haven't seen for a little while. Because the game revealed the student thinking. And you could see it both from a formative assessment written point of view and from the oral discourse. was just amazing. And to me, the one challenge, the one opportunity for learning is bringing in the benchmark numbers 0, 1, half, and 1. And I did notice scanning
That's
this.
the next, yeah. That's
So
the next
you're
lesson.
headed right there. And what's beautiful is it's the scaffold that they need. So I'm not worried about the I think it's powerful because now we're seeing who's got it and who doesn't, where we need to go as a class. And so I think, what else was I going to say? So we'll talk about a couple of things. I think that the launch was really solid, and moving into the application, I've got several details, and I'll give you the forms. But that for me was the big, powerful piece. Is I picked up sort of 3 big ideas for the improvement, sort of thinking opportunities for improvement, and one was to leave the sentence starters up over time, right? That was the one thing we discussed in the beginning. And whether you do that in real sentence starters or on a chart, but just have those, because you even alluded to the fact that they go up, you erase them, and they go up, you erase them, and sort of consistency over time for kids. The other key was this idea of the same units, and just really making sure explicit that all the kids have the right tools, and that they don't actually have tools in front of them that are propagating misconceptions, right? And then the third piece is this idea of that Sherwin brought up, which is just looking at the unit being the same size, and then the pieces being the same size, or the pieces being referring to the same, and making sure that if you're going to say same on the same unit, that doesn't mean necessarily the same size pieces, or making that language explicit. And you use the idea of introducing equivalent in there. Okay. So, yeah, so those are some of the, did I miss some of the big ideas there?
I think you pretty much hit all of it, the suggestions that I had, and also making sure they're labeling them correctly. The fractions that they've made, make sure they're...
And then using the same unit, right? As you're saying?
Right. Yeah, I didn't probably articulate that well. I'm really excited because I think this is an opportunity. You did some things, just so many things really well in the beginning, like in engagement techniques. You mentioned think, pair, share. I mean, that's gone in our year 1 course this year. I mean, that's just, hands down, and you can't get out of it. We're putting you on video front and center. You're there, okay? And that promotion of simultaneous interaction is just really powerful. You demonstrated that, that S in pies, right? And it just really worked well. So I mean, if we put it back on you then, and I think we all really want to be explicit about what we take away from this, but if we put this back on you, what are the 2 things that you're going to write down and reflect on right now? Or should we reflect, all of us, for a couple of minutes?
I love how she focuses on her learning goals. So that's an area that I feel like I need to improve on in my instruction, is to make sure that students at every lesson understand what the learning goal is, and focusing on making sure that they understand what it is that they're supposed to learn.
I think for me, my biggest goal all year is trying to get them ultimately better at writing out their responses, but part of that has been getting them to start verbalizing. So I think I'm getting there, but I still want to improve. So the sentence frames, just thinking through really how do I want that discussion to go? What do I want it to look like? So just putting a little bit more planning time into the discussion part.
One thing that I'm taking away is that I need to work on when I'm doing a lesson is the summary part. Like I noticed today when you were getting them ready for the summary, you told them, you posed a question and you were trying to get them to discuss, and you literally told them, I want responses, I want to see what you're going to say because I'm getting you ready for you to write like an answer to a problem or a question. So you were preparing them, and that's one thing I know summarizing allows us as teachers to figure out whether they understood the lesson or not, but sometimes the way we do it, okay, write about what you learned today. That's too broad. You don't really get a true understanding of what the child just did or learned. So I need strategies like that one day. You also said, okay, think about what you're going to tell your mom when you go home today. And that was kind of like the summary. You're thinking about the process of what you're learning, and then for them to literally verbalize it and write it on paper. It's a skill that I'm still trying to get ways to bring it out with the students.
Absolutely. Yeah, and my takeaway and what I would like to do is really, I'm thinking of this as supporting our new incoming teachers this summer, and I want to take some of, not only from your video, but other videos, and really highlight the things that we do well as a group, that you did well today. And so, because a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And so I'm thinking of this simultaneous interaction piece, and I'm also thinking about using the student work piece to really show how we can be more attuned to picking up the cues of student thinking. Because someone watching this video, when we go back and really watch it, it's powerful. We understand where the kids are at within about 15 minutes of watching them explore. So I think that's going to be very powerful, and I want to show that and sort of getting at this idea of the power of student thinking. And so that's my takeaway. And I'm going to put it into action in a month because I have to. Because alrighty, good. Should we bring it in? What's our closing?
What's your cheer, Queen?
Student discourse?
I don't
Right
know.
I'm done.
Spring break.
Spring break.
Spring break. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Spring break.